I'm just a grandmother who once thought I'd spend my final days surrounded by love. Instead, I was left in a place where nobody remembered my name. That's how it started. Not with a goodbye. Not even a warning, just a slow-rolling betrayal wrapped in paperwork and polite voices. I remember the day they dropped me off. My daughter Susan wouldn't meet my eyes. Her husband Rob kept checking his watch, and my grandson, sweet little Noah, clutched his tablet in the back seat like it was a lifeline. We pulled into the lot of Willow Creek Long-Term Care, a clean-looking place with beige siding and flower beds out front. A building that tried too hard to look like a home and not enough like a place people lived and died quietly. I smiled when the nurse greeted us. That's what I do, smile when I'm scared. They handed her a folder with my medications insurance forms and notes about my mobility concerns. I watched the papers pass hands like a property deed. No one asked how I felt about it. Susan hugged me tight, brief, and rehearsed. "It's only temporary, Mom," she said. "Just until things settle down." That was over 9 months ago, and I've yet to see her face again. The first night in Willow Creek was the hardest. Not because it was cold or noisy or unfamiliar, but because for the first time in my life, I realized I had been discarded. I wasn't sick. I wasn't incapable. I had arthritis, sure, and I moved slower than I used to. But I still cooked, still read, still prayed at night. I still remembered birthdays. I still mattered, or at least I used to. That first week, I learned the rhythms of the place. Breakfast at 7, pills at 8, bingo on Wednesdays, funeral announcements on Fridays. The women in the dining room spoke in half whispers. Most had eyes that stared too long, or not at all. Some called me by the wrong name. A few just rocked in their chairs, staring out the window at nothing. And me? I sat silently, smiling when spoken to, nodding politely. But inside, I was screaming. I kept a journal. Not because I thought anyone would read it, but because I needed to remind myself that I was still here. Still alive. Still me. Every day I wrote one sentence. Some days it was, "I didn't cry today." Other days, I remembered the smell of cinnamon from my old kitchen. And once, "If I ever leave this place, I will never let them forget what they did." Because, make no mistake, this wasn't a care decision. It was abandonment dressed in practicality. They said I was safer here, that they were overwhelmed, that it was best for everyone. But what they meant was, you've become inconvenient. And when you become inconvenient, even your own children find ways to disappear. But I didn't die in that room. I didn't vanish like so many others did. Something inside me, old, battered, and nearly forgotten, began to rise. A whisper that said, "This is not where your story ends." And in that quiet, sterile place where the clock ticked louder than most voices, I started planning my return. They thought they had left me behind. They had no idea what I was about to become. You don't disappear overnight. It happens slowly. First, it's the way your family stops asking your opinion. Then, it's the way the conversation skips over you at dinner, like you're a piece of furniture in the corner of the room. Still there, still useful, but never seen. Then it's the way they start saying, "You wouldn't understand, Mom. It's different now." Eventually, it's the way they stop calling altogether. And just like that, you become background noise in a life you helped build. I wasn't always this woman sitting in a beige recliner with a nurse pressing pills into my palm. I used to be Ruth, the one who made birthday cakes from scratch and built Halloween costumes with safety pins and old drapes. I used to be the woman who fixed scraped knees, balanced grocery lists, and stayed up until 3 a.m. sewing curtains because we couldn't afford new ones. I raised Susan on grit and hope. Her father died when she was 10. I worked double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on and her lunchbox full. And now, she pays the monthly fee for this room like it's charity. The last time we spoke on the phone, she told me she was grateful the staff were doing their best with me. Doing their best. I am not a burden to be managed. I am a woman who sacrificed her life so others could live theirs. And yet here I was, tucked away, like a secret no one wants to deal with. There was one nurse, though, who saw me. Kendra. Young, kind eyes, always humming something soft as she moved between rooms. She had a habit of kneeling beside patients when she spoke to them like we deserved more than words thrown from above. She noticed I didn't like taking my meds with juice, so she brought water. She learned I liked my toast dry, not soggy with butter, like the kitchen kept sending. And one afternoon, as she checked my blood pressure, she whispered, "You're not like the others." I looked at her confused. She smiled. "You're still here. I see it in your eyes. You're not done." I don't know why that hit me the way it did. But that night, when the hallway lights dimmed, and I was left with only the sound of muffled televisions and distant coughing, I opened my journal and wrote, "Someone still sees me." The next morning, something shifted. I brushed my hair before breakfast, not out of habit, but out of intention. I started walking the hallway with my cane, not just to stretch my legs, but to remind myself that I still could. I began reading aloud to the woman in the next room, Eleanor, who was mostly nonverbal, but smiled whenever I read Bible verses or old poetry. And slowly, something wild and dangerous began to grow inside me. A thought. A question. Not in some dramatic movie ending kind of way, but in real small, powerful ways. Ways that said, I am not done. The world had made me invisible. But Kendra's voice, my journal, and the quiet defiance in my own heartbeat told me something else. I had one more chapter in me, and maybe, just maybe, it would be the one they'd never forget. My birthday came in early spring. The weather had turned brighter morning's tulips blooming outside the lobby window, birds chirping like little miracles. I had always loved spring. New life, new hope. But that day I woke up with a pit in my stomach. You don't expect much when you live in a place like Willow Creek. But birthdays? They still mean something. A phone call, a card, maybe even a surprise visit. By noon, I was still waiting. I put on my nicest cardigan. Blue. Susan once told me it made my eyes stand out. I brushed my hair, added a dab of perfume from a nearly empty bottle, and waited in the common room. Other residents were napping or watching game shows. The staff were kind enough to say, "Happy birthday, Miss Ruth," but their smiles were quick, their hands full. I kept glancing toward the front door, half expecting it to swing open and reveal Susan with a grocery store cake, and Noah hiding behind her legs, holding a crayon-colored card that said, "To Grandma." But the door stayed shut, and the clock kept ticking. By 3 o'clock, I stopped pretending. I took a slow walk back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It pressed against my chest like a weight. I reached for the phone. I stared at her number. I didn't call, because I already knew what the voicemail would say. "We're so sorry, Mom. Things got hectic. We'll make it up to you next weekend." Next weekend never comes? Instead, I opened my journal and wrote something different that day. Today, they forgot me, but I will not forget myself. That evening, Kendra came in with a cupcake, one of those pre-wrapped kinds, with a swirl of icing and a plastic lid. "I know it's not much," she said, placing it gently on my nightstand. "But someone told me blue was your color." She had tied a tiny ribbon around the container. I nearly cried, not because of the cupcake, but because someone noticed. Because in a world where I had been reduced to a patient ID number and a pill schedule, someone saw the woman underneath. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I whispered aloud, "You're still here, Ruth, and if no one throws you a party, throw your own." And that was the moment I decided. The next year, I would not be here. Not in this room. Not in this building. Not in this life I hadn't chosen. They may have forgotten my birthday, but I would make damn sure they remembered what happened next. Because a woman doesn't need balloons to rise. Sometimes all she needs is to be done waiting. My room faced a brick wall. Not a metaphor, an actual gray, lifeless brick wall. 4 feet from my window. As if whoever designed this place thought we'd prefer no view at all over something worth looking at. Every morning, I opened the blinds and stared at that wall while sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. It became a routine, a ritual, a quiet protest. Because even if all I could see was concrete, I chose to see it. I chose to start my day looking outward even if there was nothing out there. But that wall started to speak to me. Not with words, of course, but with memories. Every morning, as I stared into that gray grid of mortar and shadows, I started to remember who I used to be, not just Ruth the mother, Ruth the wife, Ruth the patient, but Ruth the fighter. Ruth, the girl who left home at 16 with a suitcase full of library books and a fire in her gut. Ruth, who used to dance in the kitchen barefoot to Sam Cooke on the radio. Ruth, who once threatened to take a broom to a man who dared catcall her on the sidewalk. That Ruth had vanished beneath years of caregiving sacrifice and quiet disappointment. But the wall helped me see her again. I started writing letters. Not to anyone in particular, just letters to the girl I used to be. One each morning, right after I opened the blinds. Dear Ruth, you're still in there. I know you've been quiet for too long. I know they made you feel like you were too old, too tired, too inconvenient. But I haven't forgotten you. And I'm coming to get you back. I folded the letters and kept them under my pillow. Each one felt like a small match lit in a dark room. Around this time, something strange began to happen. Eleanor, the nearly nonverbal woman next door, began to hum when I read aloud. Just a soft sound barely there, but I noticed, and I leaned into it. I started reading to her every afternoon. Sometimes poetry, sometimes psalms, sometimes my own letters. She never spoke, but she'd squeeze my hand. And I realized she was rising too, in her own way. One morning, I wheeled her to the window. Not the one in my room, the one at the end of the hallway facing the parking lot. It wasn't much of a view, but it was sky. It was sun. We sat there in silence, watching birds flit across power lines. A nurse walked by and smiled at us like we were children who'd behaved well. But we weren't children. We were women. Women who had been boxed in, shut out, put away. But that didn't mean we were gone. I wrote in my journal that night, even a wall can't keep out the light forever. I see her now, me, and she's getting stronger. Because when you stare long enough at what they give you, you start imagining what they never thought you'd ask for. And I was almost ready to ask. Almost. They like when you're nice in places like Willow Creek. Nice means quiet. Nice means compliant. Nice means don't ask questions. Nice means don't make extra work. And for the longest time, I was nice. I said thank you when they handed me the wrong meal. I smiled when they skipped my bath 2 days in a row. I nodded politely when the administrator told me, "We're doing our best, Ruth," while the ceiling leaked and the staff rotated like strangers passing through. But on a Wednesday in late May, I stopped being nice. It started with my meds. For 3 days in a row, I noticed something was off. Dizziness, nausea, blurred vision. At first, I thought it was just a bad day. Then I checked the little cup they handed me each morning. They were giving me the wrong pills. I knew my medication schedule like scripture. I had memorized the names, the shapes, the doses. But the nurse on shift, new distracted, rushed, kept brushing me off. "It's what's in your chart, Ms. Ruth." But it wasn't. And on the third day, I refused. She raised an eyebrow. "You have to take it." I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "No, honey, I don't. And unless you want to see what a 72-year-old lawsuit looks like, I suggest you bring me the right chart and start over." Her face went pale. She stammered something and left the room. That evening, the head nurse came to speak with me. She was calm, professional, tight-lipped. "I understand there was an incident this morning." I handed her a copy of my journal. I had written everything down: dates, times, pill descriptions, and reactions. I even included a section titled, "What You'll Hear from the Lawyer If This Happens Again." She flipped through it, eyes widening slightly. "I'm not just a bed number," I said. "And I'm not here to quietly fade away." From that day forward, things changed. I got the right meds. My meals came on time. And the staff, well, they started treating me like a person, not a file. Even Eleanor got better treatment. I noticed the aides speaking more gently to her, brushing her hair, helping her sit by the sunny window without being asked. That's the thing about standing up for yourself in a system that counts on you not doing it. When you speak for others too. I wrote in my journal that night, "They've mistaken politeness for powerlessness. But there's nothing stronger than a woman who's done being nice." I wasn't angry, not bitter, just awake. Awake to the fact that being good was never going to save me. But being clear, being loud, being unapologetically alive, that was my new strategy. Because I wasn't here to make anyone comfortable anymore. I was here to make myself seen. It was a Sunday afternoon when the phone rang. Now you have to understand, my phone almost never rang. Not since I'd been at Willow Creek. Most days, the only sound it made was the beep of a missed medication reminder. But that day it rang. I stared at the caller ID. "Susan." I froze. Was this an accident? A pocket dial? Or had guilt finally crawled its way into her chest and whispered my name? I answered, "Mom." Her voice was tentative, thin, like she wasn't sure she deserved to speak to me. I didn't say anything at first, just waited. She cleared her throat. "I've been meaning to call." Silence. "You know things have been really hectic with work, and Noah's school, and Rob's promotion." Still I waited. She finally sighed. "Are you okay?" And that of all things, that word. Okay. It made something in me snap. "Do you want the polite answer or the truth I asked?" She paused. "The truth." "Then no, I'm not okay. You left me here without a proper conversation. You didn't check on me. You forgot my birthday. And when I needed you most, you acted like I was a to-do list item that got lost between meetings and grocery runs." There was a sharp breath on the other end. I imagined her sitting on her kitchen stool, hand over her mouth. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "You needed care, Mom." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was tired. I needed care, yes. But what I got was abandonment in a brochure-wrapped box. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. "Can I come visit?" It was small, but it cracked something open. For a moment, the air between us wasn't filled with blame or bitterness, but something rawer. Something closer to truth. I didn't say yes right away. I didn't want to reward her for doing what should have never been delayed. But I also didn't say no. Instead, I said, "Let me think about it." And we hung up. I sat with that moment for hours. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a shift, a possibility. She had heard me. And sometimes that's the first step. That night I wrote, "I'm not asking to be rescued. I'm asking to be remembered." And for the first time in months, I let myself hope, just a little. Because sometimes the first ring of the phone is the sound of a bridge being rebuilt. And sometimes it's the beginning of a reckoning. I avoided mirrors for months, not out of vanity. I wasn't chasing youth. I knew those days were gone. But because the woman staring back didn't look like someone I recognized. Her eyes looked tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Her shoulders curved in like apology. Her mouth held silence like it was her duty. That's the thing about abandonment. It doesn't just leave you behind. It rewrites you. But one morning, after brushing my hair with the usual disinterest, I looked up and didn't look away. For the first time in a long time, I stared. And what I saw wasn't weakness. It was weariness, yes. But beneath it, fire. The kind of fire that had cooked 100 Sunday dinners on tight budgets. The fire that had carried a sleeping child from car seat to crib without dropping a single tear. The fire that had built a life from scratch twice. I leaned closer and said aloud, "You're still in there, aren't you?" That day I did something strange. I asked Kendra to bring me a tube of lipstick. She raised her eyebrows but didn't ask questions. She came back with a soft shade rose pink. I hadn't worn lipstick since Susan's wedding, but when I applied it slowly, carefully, something shifted. It wasn't about beauty. It was about agency, about choosing to show up, choosing to care about me. Because when the world stops looking at you, it's easy to forget how to look at yourself. That evening, I wheeled myself into the recreation room. Usually, I skipped bingo and TV reruns. But tonight, I showed up, lipstick on, hair brushed, cardigan ironed. A few staff did double takes. One aide whispered, "Looking sharp, Miss Ruth." I smiled. Eleanor saw me and gave me a thumbs up, her way of saying, "I see you." I sat beside her, laid my bingo board in front of me, and whispered, "Let's win something tonight." We didn't win, but I didn't care. I had already won something far better. Myself. I wrote that night, "The mirror doesn't lie." But sometimes we do when we stop believing we matter. That day, I stopped lying to myself. I mattered. Not because anyone said so, but because I decided it, and there's nothing more dangerous than a grandmother who finally remembers who she is. It was a Thursday when she finally came. I didn't think she would, to be honest. That phone call had seemed like a fluke, like guilt trying to clear its throat. But sure enough, that afternoon, the receptionist knocked on my door and said with a smile, "You have a visitor." I wheeled myself out slowly, and there she was, Susan, holding a bouquet of daisies, my favorite, even if she'd forgotten for the past 3 years. She looked nervous, Her eyes darted across the lobby like she didn't belong. In that moment, I realized something strange. She looked older to me. Not just in years, but in weight, worry, worn-down womanhood. We stared at each other for a few seconds too long. Then she smiled. "Hi, Mom." I didn't hug her. I didn't scold her either. Instead, I said, "You're late," and gestured toward the bench by the window. She laughed softly. "You haven't changed." "Oh, I have," I said. "You just haven't been around to see it." She winced, but she sat. We talked. About Noah's school, about Rob's job, about the weather in Chicago. But the whole time, there was a silence between us that hadn't yet spoken. Until finally she did. "I'm sorry I left you here the way I did." The words came out halting, honest. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't feel something, but because I wanted to feel all of it before I answered. I looked out the window, watched two birds fly over the parking lot like they had somewhere better to be. Then I said, "Do you know what hurt the most?" She shook her head. "That it didn't even seem hard for you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter again, not the polished woman with the minivan and the color-coded calendar, but the girl who used to cry into my sweater when kids teased her for her glasses. She reached for my hand. I let her take it. We didn't solve everything that day, but she stayed for over an hour. She helped me comb Eleanor's hair. She walked me around the garden. She even complimented my lipstick. Before she left, she said, "You look different." "I am different," I said. She smiled sad and hopeful all at once. "I'd like to come back." I nodded. "You can, but you'll be visiting me, not some version of me you remember. I've changed." That night, I wrote in my journal, "Some people return when they're ready, but I won't shrink just to make them comfortable again. I'm not a memory. I'm a woman still living." Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes it means saying welcome back, but I've grown since you left. And if you want to stay, you'll have to meet me where I am now. There was a garden out back at Willow Creek. Not many residents went there. The ground was uneven, the flowers overgrown. Some said the air smelled too much like the past, like grass clippings and lost Sundays. But I loved it. It was the only place in that entire facility that wasn't artificial. No stale coffee smell, no flickering fluorescent lights, no beeping alarms. Just sunlight, weeds, and the sound of wind whispering through tired branches. Eleanor and I started going there every morning. At first, I thought she just liked the quiet, but one day she pointed at a patch of tulips and whispered, "My mother had those." It was the first full sentence I'd ever heard her say. I nearly cried. We started planting things. I asked Kendra for permission. She smiled and said, "No one uses it anyway." So we brought seeds. Tomatoes, marigolds, basil. I don't know what came over me, but I felt alive with every handful of dirt. Something about watching new life come from the ground gave me hope that I too could bloom again after so long of being buried. One morning, while pruning a rose bush, I noticed the old gate that led to the outside world. It was rusty vine-covered, barely noticeable unless you were really looking. But here's the thing, it was never locked. All this time, I thought I'd been trapped, abandoned, confined. But the gate had been open. I could have walked out. I could have asked more questions, called more people, demanded more answers. I could have left, maybe not physically right away, but mentally, emotionally. Freedom had never been denied. I'd just stopped believing I had it. That afternoon, I wheeled Eleanor to the gate. She stared at it like it was a doorway to another life. "Do you want to go through it?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not yet." "Me either," I said, "but maybe one day soon." That night, I wrote, "The gate was never locked. I was just too tired, too broken to turn the handle. But now I see it. And now I'm thinking about what's beyond it." Because the worst kind of prison isn't made of bricks or fences. It's made of belief. And the moment you stop believing you're stuck, that's when everything begins to change. It was subtle at first. The way the aides knocked a little more gently before coming in. The way Kendra paused to ask, "Do you want the window open today, Ruth, instead of just deciding for me?" Even the way the other residents began to look at me, not with pity, but curiosity. Something had shifted. And the strangest part? It wasn't because I yelled or demanded or fought. It was because I remembered who I was. I stopped acting like I was invisible, and they started seeing me. There was a new girl Maria just hired, young with nervous hands and soft sneakers that squeaked down the hallway. On her first day, she was assigned to help me dress. She came in all fumbles and apologies. I'm sorry I haven't done this room before. I smiled. Take a breath, sweetheart. You're doing fine. She paused, eyes wide. You're Ruth Wright, the garden lady. I chuckled. I suppose I am now. She blushed. The others told me you're kind of a legend around here. I blinked. A legend. Later that day, I overheard two staff talking in the hallway. That's Ruth, one whispered. She stood up to the director about meds last spring, and now she runs that garden out back. The residents love her. I didn't interrupt. I just sat in my wheelchair and smiled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just a patient. I was a person. Even Susan noticed the change. On her next visit, she brought me a sun hat and gloves. I heard you're quite the horticulturist now, she teased. I raised an eyebrow. That's one word for it. She looked around the room, now covered in potted plants, handmade cards from Eleanor, and small framed notes of poetry I'd written. This place feels like you now. That meant more than she knew. That night, I wrote in my journal, people don't always remember what you say, but they remember how you made them feel. And now, when they say my name, I hear respect in it. Because I hadn't waited for someone to give me power. I claimed it. Quietly, gracefully, relentlessly. Because I was Ruth, and Ruth wasn't gone. She had just been waiting to be called back to life. It was Eleanor's idea, really. One afternoon, while we were weeding the little vegetable patch by the rose trellis, she whispered something so unexpected I almost thought I'd imagined it. You should write to them, she said. I looked over. Write to who? She shrugged, but her eyes said what her lips wouldn't. Your family. That night, I sat at my desk with a blank piece of paper in front of me. The pen hovered uncertain. My hands trembled not from age, but from memory. What was I supposed to write? Dear Susan, just wanted to thank you for dropping me in a place you didn't bother to vet. Dear Rob, haven't heard from you since Christmas 2018. Glad to know your guilt sleeps well. No, that wasn't who I wanted to be anymore. I wasn't writing from bitterness. I was writing from strength. So I started, Dear Susan, you may never fully understand what these past 2 years have done to me, but I want to tell you something. And the words came like water breaking through a dam. I wrote not just to her, but for me. Not to shame, but to reclaim. I wrote about the mornings I cried alone with no hand to hold. About the silent nights when I prayed not to wake up. About the time I found a piece of myself in a rose garden no one else cared about. About Eleanor. About lipstick. About that moment, I realized the gate was never locked. I didn't ask for apologies. I offered truth, and the letter became more than paper and ink. It became my voice. I folded it neatly, slipped it into an envelope, but I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I placed it in the top drawer of my nightstand underneath my journal. Because sometimes healing isn't about confrontation. It's about articulation. It's about saying the thing, even if no one hears it, so that you know it was said. That night, I wrote, the words I write for others often become the balm I didn't know I needed. I don't write to be forgiven. I write to be free. And when I turned off the light, I slept deeper than I had in months. Not because they had come back, but because I had finally come back to myself. Grief doesn't always arrive in sobs and black dresses. Sometimes it comes in whispers. Quiet moments of missing of mourning, what never was, of longing for love that should have come naturally, but didn't. For months, I'd carried that grief like a second skin. The grief of being forgotten, of being reduced to a burden, of knowing your name only matters when it shows up in someone's obligation list. But something changed. It didn't happen in one thunderous moment. It happened slowly, like sunlight creeping into a dark room through a tear in the curtain. It was the day I caught myself humming. No music, no reason. Just standing by the window watching the breeze move the curtains, and I was humming an old tune from childhood. That's when I knew the pain no longer owned me. It lived beside me. Still there, still breathing, but no longer driving the car. Later that week, we had a talent night at Willow Creek. I hadn't performed in front of anyone since my 40s, but Kendra encouraged me. "You've got stories, Ruth. People listen when you speak." I didn't sing. I didn't dance. I stood on stage with nothing but a folded paper and my voice. And I read one of my journal entries. "I am not the sum of who left me. I am not the echo of silence or slammed doors. I am the breath that kept going. I am the seed that cracked concrete." The room was quiet, then came soft clapping. A few tears, even from Maria, the new girl who whispered later. My grandma would have loved that. That night, as I tucked myself into bed, I whispered aloud, "I'm proud of you," not because anyone else had said it, but because I believed it. Pain didn't vanish. It just learned its place. It wasn't my narrator anymore. It wasn't my identity. It was simply a part of my story, not the whole of it. That night's journal entry read, "The moment you stop asking why they hurt you is the moment you start asking how you'll heal. And healing is where you get to speak." I'd spent too long waiting for closure. Turns out I was the closure. It was just after dawn. The garden shimmered with dew, and the marigolds were in full bloom, bold orange little flames against the green. Eleanor was beside me, slowly pouring water from a small silver can. We didn't speak much anymore. We didn't have to. That morning felt different, though. The air was lighter, as if something long held had finally let go. And then I saw it. The gate. Still rusty. Still overgrown. But now, it felt like an invitation. I looked at Eleanor. She nodded without a word, and for the first time, I wheeled myself toward it. My hand reached out, fingers wrapping around the cool metal handle. There was no resistance. No creak, no groan. Just a click. And the gate slowly opened. I didn't walk out into the world that day. I didn't need to. Opening it was symbolic, an act of reclaiming the narrative. Because for so long, I thought I was put away, discarded, left behind. But the truth, I had simply been waiting for the right moment to remind the world I wasn't gone. Later that afternoon, I asked Kendra if I could visit the library in town sometime soon. She looked surprised. Alone. With Eleanor, I smiled. "We're thinking about starting a little book club." She beamed. "I'll make the arrangements." That night, Eleanor handed me a folded napkin. Inside, in shaky handwriting, she had written, "You opened the gate. I saw you. I believed I could too." I cried. Quiet, grateful tears. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the quiet revolution that happens when one woman remembers her worth. And another follows. My journal entry was simple that night. Sometimes freedom isn't found by running away. It's found by opening the gate within. The world was still the same. But I wasn't. And that made all the difference. It was a chilly Saturday when he showed up. Rob, my son. The one who hadn't visited since the day they dropped me off like a box marked fragile, unwanted. I was trimming the tomato vines with Eleanor when Maria tapped me on the shoulder. "Ms. Ruth, there's someone here for you." I turned. And there he was. Older. Grayer. Eyes that looked like he hadn't slept properly in years. He had his hands in his coat pockets like a boy about to get scolded. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I waited. "Hi, Mom." His voice cracked. I don't expect anything. I needed to see you." I nodded slowly. "It's been a long time." He stepped forward, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and placed it on the garden bench beside me. "I found this last week," he said. "It's the birthday card you sent 3 years ago. The one I never opened." He looked down, ashamed. I was wrong. About everything. I picked up the card and unfolded it. Inside, in my familiar cursive, it said, "Even when you forget me, I'll never stop loving you." A line written in pain, but one I didn't regret. He sat down beside me. And for a while, we just watched the wind move through the vines. "I've been seeing a counselor," he finally said. "She told me the first step to healing is facing the people I hurt." I looked at him. And for the first time in years, I saw my son. Not the man who had walked away, but the boy who once built me a paper crown on Mother's Day and called me his queen. We talked for over an hour. About mistakes, regret, shame, but also about hope. I didn't offer him forgiveness like a trophy. I offered him presence. Because healing isn't always about making things like they were. Sometimes it's about learning to walk forward together, scarred but willing. Before he left, he hugged me, tighter than I expected. He whispered, "You're stronger than I ever knew." And I whispered back, I had to be. Because no one else was going to save me. That night, I wrote, "Sometimes the ones who left come back with empty hands, and you have to decide, will you give them another chance or protect the peace you bled to earn?" Today, I did both. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it says, "I see you, and I'm still standing." The sun was setting outside my window. Soft orange bled into lavender skies, casting long shadows across the room. I sat at my little writing desk, fingers grazing the spine of my journal, the same one I started when they first brought me here. Back when I felt like a burden. Back when I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Back when silence seemed like the only language left to me. But now I saw her clearly. A woman who didn't break, she bent. Who didn't vanish, she waited. Who didn't scream, she grew. I used to think survival was the best I could hope for. Now I know better. I've lived. Fully. Deliberately. Unapologetically. Last week, the director asked me to help mentor a new resident, Margaret, early 80s, recent stroke, barely speaking. She wouldn't leave her room, so I wheeled in quietly with a book of poems and a potted violet. She didn't look up at first, but I began reading anyway. And somewhere between the second and third stanza, she whispered, "Keep going." That night, I cried again. Not from pain, but from purpose. Because I finally understood. I wasn't just coming back stronger for me. I was doing it for the women still finding their voice. For the grandmothers still sitting in silence. For every soul told they were too old, too broken, too late. I closed my journal with one final entry. I am not what was done to me. I am not the people who left. I am not the place they put me. I am the woman who bloomed where they buried her. I am the storm they didn't see coming, and I am still rising. So to you, dear listener, if you've ever felt left behind, if you've ever sat in a room full of people and still felt invisible, if you've ever believed your story was over, let this be your reminder. You are not finished. Your voice matters. And you are stronger than they ever knew. What would you have done if you were me? Have you ever been left behind, but found your way back? Tell me in the comments. Your story deserves to be heard too. Thank you for listening.